Sophie had been planning her father's birthday celebration for weeks, meticulously weaving together every detail in her mind. She had chosen the restaurant herself, her brother's place, a cozy yet elegant spot that her father adored, with warm lights, soft music, and a menu that always made him smile. She had even gone so far as to pre-select his favorite dishes and arranged a surprise dessert at the end, thinking it would make him feel cherished, appreciated, and loved. For Sophie, this celebration wasn't just about a birthday, it was a way to repay the man who had been her anchor, her confidant, the one who had always believed in her when no one else did. When the day arrived, Sophie was bubbling with anticipation. She had imagined the scene countless times, her father walking through the restaurant doors, eyes lighting up at the sight of family gathered to celebrate him, laughter spilling from the table, and warm hugs from those he loved most. Sophie had rehearsed her smile, imagined the joy in his voice, and even pictured the sparkle in his eyes when he realized how much thought she had put into every detail. But reality shattered her vision within moments. Her husband, Ryan, strode into the living room with an expression that Sophie would later recognize as smug satisfaction. "I brought my parents," he announced casually, as though he had performed a favor for the universe. "They deserve the reservation more than your dad. Go to some cheap pub instead." Sophie's heart stopped. Her carefully planned evening, the joy she had envisioned for her father, crumbled like dry leaves in her hands. "But, my brother owns this place. I booked it for Dad," she protested, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with disbelief. Ryan's grin didn't falter. "I said my family deserves it more. End of discussion." The words hit her like icy shards. Sophie's father, standing quietly beside her, attempted a polite smile, but she saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes, the tiny, almost imperceptible shadow that passed across his face when he realized he would not be honored in the way Sophie had intended. It was a look that no daughter should ever have to witness on a day meant for her parents' happiness. Sophie tried to argue, to negotiate, to find some compromise, but Ryan had already made his decision. Her plans dissolved into frustration and disbelief. The restaurant that had felt like an extension of her family, a place of love and care, now seemed like a fortress she had been barred from entering. So she found herself alone that evening, walking through dimly lit streets to a small, nondescript pub across town. The warmth she had hoped to create for her father was gone, replaced by the bitter tang of humiliation and sorrow. She ordered a glass of wine, but it tasted more like regret than relaxation. She replayed every detail of the confrontation, every dismissive glance from Ryan, and the selfish tone in his voice. Yet, amid the heartbreak, something began to simmer, a quiet, resolute fire in Sophie's chest. She realized she couldn't change what had happened that night, but she could control what came next. She could not undo the betrayal, but she could ensure it would never happen again. Her mind, ever the planner, began to weave possibilities, strategies, and quiet revenge. As she raised her glass in a silent toast to the father who deserved better, Sophie made a vow to herself: this injustice would not define her. She would reclaim her power, protect her family, and ensure that someday, the scales of respect and dignity would be balanced, and perhaps, that the lesson would be learned in a way Ryan would never forget. The days after her father's ruined birthday were heavy, a haze of anger and disbelief that clung to Sophie like a second skin. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ryan's smug smile, heard the dismissive lilt in his voice, and felt the sharp sting of being disregarded. She had imagined that marriage would be partnership, respect, and shared joy, but that evening had revealed a different truth. Ryan didn't just ignore her efforts, he actively undermined them. He had dismissed her family, her father's happiness, and her own careful planning with a single, thoughtless wave of entitlement. At first, Sophie tried to push it aside. She told herself that anger wasn't productive, that she should simply accept the slight and move on. But the more she reflected, the more she realized this wasn't just an isolated incident. Ryan's behavior was a pattern of selfishness that had quietly crept into their marriage, small decisions that disregarded her opinions, casual dismissals of her family, subtle ways he made her feel secondary. The birthday incident had simply brought it all into glaring, painful focus. Yet amid the hurt, something else began to emerge: clarity. Sophie had always been a thinker, a planner. She had an ability to see paths through chaos that others missed, to anticipate outcomes and turn small actions into meaningful results. And now, that skill began to awaken for a new purpose. She would not allow herself, or her family, to be treated as an afterthought. She would not be dismissed or silenced. Sophie spent long evenings walking alone, thinking through possibilities, imagining scenarios, and quietly strategizing. She replayed the birthday incident from every angle, searching for weaknesses, opportunities, and leverage. Each memory of Ryan's arrogance fueled her determination, transforming frustration into a cold, simmering resolve. She realized revenge, if approached cleverly, didn't have to be cruel, it could be precise, satisfying, and even elegant. It could be about reclaiming dignity rather than inflicting pain. She also reminded herself why she was doing this. Her father had been disappointed not because of her planning but because Ryan had stolen the moment she had carefully orchestrated. That injustice needed correction. It wasn't about proving superiority for her own ego, it was about ensuring that respect, loyalty, and family values were recognized. In quiet moments, Sophie began to imagine the contours of her plan. She could subtly assert control, using intelligence, charm, and timing rather than confrontation. She could protect her family, honor her father, and create a scenario in which Ryan's arrogance would be naturally checked. The thought made her heart race, not with malice, but with anticipation. Sophie also noticed how the betrayal had strengthened her. Where she had once doubted her own judgment, she now recognized her instincts, her foresight, and her ability to navigate difficult situations. The incident, painful as it was, had forced her to see herself clearly, capable, clever, and unwilling to be underestimated. By the end of the week, Sophie had decided. She would not speak of revenge openly, nor confront Ryan directly. Instead, she would orchestrate events behind the scenes, quietly ensuring that those who had dismissed her, and her father, would witness the consequences of their disregard. It would be subtle. It would be satisfying. And it would be perfect. Sophie poured herself another cup of tea and smiled softly to herself. The storm of anger had calmed into a sharp, precise determination. For the first time since the birthday disaster, she felt power, not over Ryan, but over the situation. And that power, she knew, could not be taken from her. Sophie had spent the past week replaying the birthday incident in her mind, turning frustration into strategy, anger into focus. She knew the time for idle resentment had passed, now was the moment for action, subtle and deliberate. Her revenge would not be loud or humiliating, it would be clever, precise, and deeply satisfying, a quiet demonstration that she could protect her family and command respect without losing her composure. The first step was to involve her brother. Sophie called him casually, speaking lightly about the restaurant's upcoming special tasting menu, a highly exclusive evening designed for loyal patrons who truly appreciated the culinary experience he offered. "It's almost fully booked," she said, her tone breezy, "but I think Dad would really love to be part of it." She made it sound like a small, thoughtful favor, but in reality, this was the beginning of a plan that would honor her father in a way Ryan and his parents could not interrupt. Meanwhile, Sophie began planting subtle psychological breadcrumbs with Ryan. She casually mentioned the VIP tasting in passing, ensuring he heard enough to pique his curiosity but not enough to secure an invitation. Ryan, predictably, assumed entitlement would carry him in. He had always believed he could bend circumstances to suit his desires. Sophie smiled sweetly, masking the thrill she felt at watching his arrogance collide with reality. Every time he asked questions or hinted at attending, she deflected, mentioning vague policies and limited availability, each statement carefully measured to frustrate without confrontation. As the week progressed, Sophie worked quietly behind the scenes. She coordinated with her brother to create a flawless evening, down to the smallest details, her father's favorite dishes prepared with extra care, a subtle but elegant arrangement of flowers at the table, and the perfect balance of music that made the room feel intimate yet celebratory. Sophie's mind raced with ideas, imagining the expression on her father's face when he arrived and realized that this evening was a product of her planning, undisturbed by Ryan's selfish interference. Sophie also felt a strange satisfaction watching Ryan's subtle agitation grow. He was polite enough not to make a scene, but Sophie knew him well. Every frustrated glance at his phone, every forced smile, every whispered comment about missing the exclusive event fueled her resolve. This was not about cruelty, it was about balance. She was teaching, gently but firmly, that dismissing her family, and her efforts, had consequences. In quiet moments, Sophie allowed herself a sense of calm triumph. The storm of anger that had consumed her after the birthday was now a focused energy, a tool she wielded with precision. She wasn't rushing, wasn't acting impulsively, she was orchestrating, observing, and waiting for the perfect moment when her father, the center of attention he had deserved, would be celebrated properly. By the time the evening arrived, Sophie felt ready. Every detail had been considered, every potential disruption accounted for. She had turned the betrayal into a canvas for her cleverness, creating an experience where dignity, respect, and family honor would shine. And somewhere deep inside, Sophie understood that the most satisfying part of her revenge would not be humiliation, it would be the quiet, undeniable proof that she could protect her family, orchestrate joy, and reclaim control without lowering herself to anger or confrontation. For Sophie, this was more than revenge. It was a declaration of self-worth, a statement that she could rise above betrayal and create beauty from pain, and a subtle reminder that those who dismissed her underestimated her at their peril. The night had arrived, and Sophie's anticipation was electric. She had spent days coordinating with her brother, ensuring that every aspect of the evening was flawless. As she approached the restaurant, a calm confidence settled over her, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions she had endured just a week earlier. This time, she would not be dismissed. This time, her father would be celebrated in the way he truly deserved, and Ryan's arrogance would meet a quiet, undeniable truth. The restaurant glowed warmly, soft lights reflecting off polished wood, candles flickering on every table, and the gentle hum of music welcoming guests into a space that was both intimate and elegant. Sophie's father arrived first, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. The table was decorated beautifully, just as Sophie had imagined, with his favorite flowers and a carefully selected centerpiece. The menu reflected his tastes, each dish crafted with care and thought. The smile on his face, the glimmer in his eyes, was worth more than any confrontation or argument. Sophie felt a surge of pride and love, knowing that she had preserved this moment for him. Meanwhile, Ryan and his parents were conspicuously absent. They had not been invited, nor had they suspected the magnitude of the celebration Sophie had orchestrated. They were left to speculate, their sense of entitlement colliding with reality in a quiet but sharp sting of frustration. Sophie had not sought to humiliate them openly, she had simply reclaimed what was rightfully hers and her father's. And that, she knew, was far more satisfying than any overt act of vengeance. As the evening progressed, Sophie observed her father's delight, his laughter ringing clear and genuine, the warmth between family members filling the room. It was everything she had hoped for, the love, the connection, the shared joy. And in those moments, she realized something profound, not only had she given her father the celebration he deserved, but she had also affirmed her own strength and resourcefulness. The betrayal, the frustration, the heartbreak, all of it had been transformed into something beautiful, something meaningful. Sophie allowed herself a quiet smile, savoring the subtle triumph of the night. She had not needed to argue, confront, or demean anyone to assert her dignity. Her clever planning, patience, and careful orchestration had spoken louder than words ever could. Ryan's absence, though unremarkable to others, was a constant reminder of the consequences of dismissing her and her family. Sophie's revenge was not loud or vengeful, it was elegant, heartfelt, and complete. Later, as the evening drew to a close, her father pulled her aside, hugging her tightly. "You've given me more than I could have ever imagined," he whispered, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Sophie. This means everything." In that embrace, Sophie felt every pang of hurt from the past week dissolve, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of having protected the people she loved most. She glanced around the room, at the laughter, the smiles, and the joy she had curated. The betrayal she had suffered at the hands of her husband had sparked a transformation, she had discovered her own resilience, intelligence, and capacity for subtle, perfect revenge. And in that moment, Sophie understood that true triumph did not come from anger or malice, but from grace, cleverness, and love. For Sophie, the night was more than a celebration, it was a victory. A victory of heart, of dignity, and of the quiet, sweet power of standing up for oneself when it mattered most.